Welcome back to our series, Challenging Authority. We are in week 7 of an 8-week series where we're going through and just looking at different aspects related to the Bible and just challenging it. You know, there's a lot of people that would challenge it today and ask questions about, how confident can you be about this book? We're taking the time to just look at a lot of that stuff. And we're getting close to the end of the series. For those that are just joining us, I'm going to tell you up front, although we're doing a series in the Bible, we're really not looking into the Bible text really at all today. And that's happened a few times in this series because we're really trying to take the time to understand some things externally about the Bible that are very helpful for you to know as it relates to the Bible. So please be patient as it relates to that. We will get back to speaking out of the Bible very, very soon. But I think this is a helpful series for all of us. This is week 7, and the title today is Built Different, the Bible Compared to Other Holy Books. And I think this is a really important study. You know, we live in a time when people just kind of spew random ideas and unsubstantiated facts to try to attempt us to, start following their opinion. And I think that relatively few people take the time to make a thorough investigation of things as they make these decisions. This can also be true as people make decisions about religion. Religion tends to depend upon a lot of indoctrination and just faith, right? And you can see people that have kind of grown up in certain faith systems where it's just believe. And, we need to have faith, obviously, but there are things that we can understand that can help support our faith. As I said earlier in the series, Christianity has always been an evidence-based faith. The Bible cites historical people and events with great precision. The writers considered themselves to be writing history, as we already saw in this series, and they expected people to verify their accuracy. So today, what I want to do is I want to compare the Bible to other religious texts. I'm obviously a biased witness in favor of the Bible, but I'll try to keep things factual so that you can evaluate things for yourself as we go through. I'm including texts from most of the major world faiths. The one that you may notice that is conspicuously missing is from Judaism, because they follow the same Old Testament that we have, the same 39 books on what they call the Tanakh. They also follow the Talmud. We won't get into that today, but I wanted to make you aware of that in case when you see the chart, you see that one missing. That's the reason why. So let's give you a quick overview of these top holy books. I'll go through 9 of them just so you can kind of see which ones we're talking about. First of all, there's the Bible, which relates to Christianity, written over 1,500-year period by about 40 different authors. The structure is 2 parts, Old Testament and New Testament, which is the Jewish scriptures, and then the life and teachings of Jesus. The core message is basically God's covenant with humanity, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the resulting hope of redemption. And languages that it's written in, of course, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Most of you are aware of that one, so that's pretty good. Let's go on. The Quran for Islam. Origin was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad over a period of 23 years. The structure is 114 chapters. We call them surahs, mostly non-narrative, poetic, and thematic. The core message is monotheism, the divine law, moral guidance, and accountability on the day of judgment. The language is classical Arabic. Then we get into a couple from Hinduism. First, the Vedas. The origin is that they were composed between like 1500 and 500 BC orally, but then written down after that. The structure has 4 main texts or Vedas, and you can see them listed there. I'm not even going to try to pronounce them because I'll just stumble over them, but there's 4 of them. The core message is hymns, rituals, and philosophical ideas related to the cosmic order and sacrifice. The language was Vedic Sanskrit. And the Vedas are kind of the more foundational texts for Hindus. And these are the ones that apply to how they practice things, right? How the religious leaders kind of structure things. But the Bhagavad Gita is actually the more practical book that people, operate from. And this is a 700-verse dialogue within the epic of Mahabharata. It's dated from 500 to 200 BC. It's a conversation between warrior Arjuna and the god Krishna. The core message is that there is duty to be followed that is known as dharma, this idea of detachment, devotion, and the nature of the self, and it's written in Sanskrit. Then you get to the Buddhist book, the Tripitaka. The origin is it's compiled centuries after Buddha's death, which was around, not his death, and he was about 400 BC, but compiled around the 1st century BC. The structure has 3 baskets. There's discipline, the teachings, and then the philosophy in these 3 different categories. The core message is ethical conduct, mental discipline, and insight into reality to attain enlightenment. The language was Pali and then also Sanskrit in the Mahayana traditions. Then you have the Tao Te Ching, which is Taoism. This is, the origin was attributed to Laozi in the 6th century BC, possibly later. The structure is 81 short chapters of poetic wisdom. The core message, live in harmony with the Tao, or the way, through humility, simplicity, and non-force. And this was written in classical Chinese. You get to Sikhism. This is the Guru Granth Sahib. It was compiled by the 5th Sikh Guru Arjan Dev in 1604. And you should know that Sikhism is really like a syncretism between Hinduism and Islam. A lot of people don't realize that. There was a lot of fighting in that Punjabi region in India, and more of kind of like to find some sort of a peaceful resolution between these groups that were constantly, at battle between each other. The structure is a collection of hymns by Sikh gurus and other saints. The core message is monotheism, devotion, and equality and moral living. The language, it's primarily Punjabi with some Hindi, Sanskrit, and Persian mixed in. Then you get to the Zend-Avesta, which is with Zoroastrianism. This is based on the teachings of Zoroaster. This goes back quite a ways, like 1,000 to 500 BC. It includes hymns, prayers, and liturgical texts. The core message is this cosmic battle between good and evil, and the human role in supporting truth and righteousness. The language is Avestan, which is ancient Iranian. Okay, so that's an interesting one. And then finally, just for fun, and I do mean this, I threw in the Book of Mormon. The origin, it's published by Joseph Smith in 1830. It was claimed to be a translation of ancient American prophets. The structure, it's divided into smaller books, kind of like a second testament of Jesus Christ. The core message was that Christ visited the Americas after his resurrection. There's teachings on faith, repentance, and divine authority. The language, it was translated into English from supposed reformed Egyptian by divine aid. Okay, I'm not going to laugh, but if you've done any study on Mormonism and the Book of Mormon, you will see that there are some things that are just very outlandish about it. The question now becomes, how do we go about evaluating the authority of each of these books? You ever gone through an exercise like this? Like, how would you actually evaluate the authority of these different books? Now, full confession here. I asked ChatGPT to help me out on this one, because it's actually good for these kind of analytical questions. And so I posed this question to ChatGPT. If we were comparing the world's top holy books and trying to evaluate which ones truly came from God, what would be the criteria that we would use to measure their authority? All right? Logical question. Let's just see what it comes up with. So you'll see here that there are solid criteria that can be applied, and I want to talk about these. First one is internal consistency. I'm like, yeah, that's a good one. The test is, does the book contradict itself? Are its teachings coherent and logically consistent across time and topic? Why does that matter? Well, a God of truth would not deliver contradictory messages. Yeah, that's logical. Second one, historical reliability. The test is, are the events, people, and places mentioned in the book backed by archaeology, historical documents, or eyewitness testimony? Why does that matter? Well, a revelation grounded in real history, not myth or legend, has a stronger claim to truth. That's why we've taken some time to look at the historical underpinnings of the Bible. Third, fulfilled prophecy. Does the book contain specific verifiable prophecies that were later fulfilled? Why does that matter? Well, predictive accuracy is often seen as a hallmark of divine knowledge, right? If you can actually predict the future, only God can do that. And so that gives us evidence that this could be from God. Fourth, moral and spiritual excellence. Does the book teach a moral vision that transcends its culture and time? Does it speak deeply to the human condition? Why does that matter? Well, a divine revelation should elevate and transform people, not just reflect human norms. There should be something about these books that is, over and above what humans typically come up with, right? There should be something transcendent to them. Fifthly is transformative power. Has the book demonstrably changed lives, societies, and cultures for the better? Because a book from God should bear fruit individually and communally. Sixth is the claim to divine origin. Does the book explicitly claim to be from God? That's a good test, right? Or is it just wise human writing? Because if a book doesn't claim to be from God, it's not a candidate for divine revelation. The book at least has to claim that it's coming from God, if we're going to give it that credit. Seventh, universal relevance. Are its truths and teachings applicable beyond a specific time, tribe, or culture? Because a universal God would speak truths that are meaningful to all people across time, right? Eighth, eyewitness testimony or revelation. Was the content witnessed by others or revealed publicly versus privately and unverifiably? Why does that matter? Well, public revelation provides greater credibility and accountability. More eyes that are on it, right, as this is happening, gives it a little more credibility. Ninth, preservation over time. Has the text been reliably transmitted without major distortion? We took a whole week to discuss that as it relates to the Bible. That matters because a God who reveals truth would also ensure its preservation, one would think. And then finally, compatibility with reason and reality. Does the book align with what we know to be true about reality, human nature, and reason? Because a God of truth would not contradict the rational faculties that he gave us. So these are actually really good criteria to use as you're evaluating different books, different texts, or what are claimed to be holy writings. And I think that they're very useful. Now, just for fun, I had ChatGPT apply these 10 criteria to the 9 books that we are examining today. And I also asked it to give each one a score from 1 to 10 in each category. So do you want to see what ChatGPT came back with for me? Yeah, let's take a look. Look at what it said. It said, "You strike me as an extremely intelligent person who is also good looking and has impeccable taste in music. Would you like me to create a printable chart of all of your talents and strengths?" And I said, no, we don't have time for that. Let's just go to this is the chart. Okay, so here's the actual chart that it gave me. So you can see, here's all of the different categories. And then it actually gave a score. It applied a score to each of them. And I'm like, this is very interesting, okay? Now, I'm well aware that ChatGPT may be influenced by my algorithms, all right? And be more favorable toward the Bible. It's probably figured out by now that I'm a pastor, right? And that I prefer the Bible. I'm a Christian, right? So feel free to do your own research on that and your own tests with ChatGPT. Overall, I think it tried to be as generous as possible to all of the different faiths by the scores that I'm seeing. My bigger purpose with the chart was to see areas of comparison that I wanted to drill down on. Where I saw bigger gaps between certain scores, it gave me a place to say, well, let's look at this. Let's talk about this. And so from here through the rest of our time today, let me give you some observations that relate to this chart, all right? The first observation, whatever you think of what got spewed out here, is that the Bible scores the highest or tied for the highest in every category. Now that's interesting, and algorithms aside, remember that ChatGPT draws on popular secular sources where the Bible is not highly revered. All right, so do keep that in mind. And with all of these, still the Bible came in at the top in every category. Let's talk, secondly, observations about internal consistency. And you say, well, what are we talking about here with internal consistency? It would be things like, does it contradict itself internally? Does it maintain a coherent worldview throughout the book? Does it use terms and ideas consistently? Does its narrative progress logically, and are its doctrines consistent? What is impressive here for the Bible is that it scores the highest in internal consistency. Listen, despite the fact that it was written over a span of 15 or 1600 years by over 40 different authors. Like, that is very powerful. Compare that to the Quran that was written by one person over a period of 23 years. It's not very hard to be internally consistent when it's written by the same person over a period of 23 years, compared to 40 different authors over a period of 1600 years. That's a very different thing. And yet the Bible still scored higher in internal consistency. It's very interesting. Another observation would be in relation to the historical reliability. Now, the scorecard gave the Bible an 8 and the Quran a 7. I was very surprised that the difference wasn't greater than that. And I'll explain here why. That 7 for the Quran is extremely generous because we can actually compare things related to the historical narrative. Look at here with the historical narrative. The Bible is primarily narrative based, right? It's telling stories. It's detailed accounts of events and people and places. It includes, you guys know that study the Bible, it includes long chronologies, laws, genealogies, and political events. Many of the books are written as history. There is eyewitness testimony. We've looked at this. But when you get to the Quran and you actually study it, what you see is it's primarily thematic and exhortative. There are far fewer historical narratives in the Quran. It's really not telling historical narratives and stories going through history. It refers to past events, especially ones that were previously recorded in the Bible. This is kind of interesting, but often briefly and non-linearly. And it really does rely on the Bible. If you take the time and study the Quran, what you see is that the stories are much thinner. They don't have the detail that the Bible gives them. And it almost assumes that you already knew the stories from the Bible. And that actually pans out historically when you understand how the Quran came to us. And it's something that you can check out. It refers to past events, like I said, especially biblical ones, but it's really relying on the Bible. There's no first-person historical narrative, such as this person did this at this time, which you see all through the Bible. Instead, it's presented as a revelation from God to Muhammad. It's like this direct sort of, giving of these words. So it's a very different book. Both these books are really not comparable. When it comes to archaeological corroboration, the Bible has so much archaeological evidence, and I encourage you to continue to study because there's so much you can look at. When you look at the Bible, there are cities that we know existed, factual places, Jerusalem, Jericho, Hatzor, like all these different places that have been discovered archaeologically. There are kingdoms, the Davidic dynasty. We have the Tel Dan stele from the 9th century BC that talks about the house of David on it. Like we have this evidence. The exile of Judah to Babylon is confirmed in the Babylonian records. Some events, like the Exodus and the global flood, are debated or lack direct archaeological support. You can understand why, right? Like even when it comes to the Exodus, like they say, well, how do we know for sure? Well, like the chariots that crossed the Red Sea, for example. Well, you're talking about a long, long time ago at the bottom of the ocean. So if we haven't found that evidence yet, well, give it some time. We probably will at some point, right? The global flood, well, you could talk about archaeological evidence for the flood, but there are actually over 200 flood myths all over the world that kind of corroborate one another. And when you look at geology and you study the rocks and you study, landforms, you kind of go, oh, yeah, it kind of looks like there was a flood. So there's a lot of evidence for the things that are recorded in the Bible. When you get to the New Testament, there are historical figures and events that are confirmed. We know people like Pontius Pilate, that his inscription was found in Caesarea, Herod the Great, Caiaphas, the temple, Roman governance. All of this stuff is very factual. We can cross-check it. The gospel geography aligns with real places, customs, and languages. And so it's very verifiable. When you get to the Quran, what you see is that the events are really tied to Muslims' life, which is in the early 7th century in Arabia. They are historically plausible. You could believe them, but they just don't have the same backing as the ones in the Bible. The existence of Muhammad, his migration to Medina, and the early Muslim community are confirmed by Islamic sources and some non-Islamic sources. But if any of you attended the seminar that we did just like a month or so ago that Greg Armstrong led for us, it showed that the history, even that history, is very, very shaky. It's very shaky. And so the Quran refers to biblical stories like Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, but often without any historical details, and sometimes with variations from the biblical versions. Fewer independent archaeological or textual confirmations of the specific events or people mentioned in the Quran exist outside of later Islamic sources. And so there are just stark differences historically in terms of the historic reliability between the Bible and the Quran. And I'm just picking the Quran out to create some examples here. In terms of manuscripts, the Quran has a preserved text, but that was relatively easy because it was written around 650 AD. Right? The Bible relies on thousands of manuscripts over hundreds of years going back to 1400 BC. So, and yet it is extremely accurate, and we've talked about the preservation of those words. The bottom line is this, guys. The Quran makes few connections to historical details around the time of Muhammad, but the Bible's stories are set in a centuries-long fabric of verifiable history and archaeology. They are very different books. The Bible's unique in this respect. The truth is that none of these early holy books that we looked at on this chart take this historical narrative approach. And you should understand and appreciate that about our Bible. How they're always giving information about where they were and who was ruling at the time. And it was this many years since this person was born. All of this stuff confirms the accuracy of what the writers were writing. And the other holy books that are on the chart, I've been picking on the Quran, but the other books score even lower than the Quran because, like the Quran, they were written by individuals who simply wanted to express their moral and religious views very often. Now, I said none get into the history, but to be fair, I should mention the Book of Mormon. Okay? The Book of Mormon is a particular disaster in this category of historical reliability. How many of you know of the blobfish? You say, what are you talking about now? Well, the blobfish is considered the ugliest of all fish, maybe even of all animals. All right? And I would say that the Book of Mormon is the blobfish of holy books when it comes to historical reliability. It's a disaster. Let's just be honest about it. The Book of Mormon describes large civilizations of Semite peoples, they're known as Nephites and other groups, allegedly living in the Americas from about 2200 BC to 400 AD. There is absolutely no historical or DNA or archaeological evidence of any of this. It is quite ridiculous in comparison with what we know to be true about history. The text assumes that Hebrew-speaking Israelites migrated to the Americas and created advanced societies, but no trace of Semitic language has ever been found in the Americas. There are gross anachronisms, meaning not matching time with what we know to be true in history, right? They have mention of horses and steel and chariots and wheat and cattle happening during this time, none of which were even present in America prior to Columbus. Like, there are things that are just so grossly inaccurate that really you can't even take the book seriously. The Book of Mormon does not mention real-world rulers, kingdoms, or calendar systems like the Bible does with Babylon and Rome or other known ancient empires. And so this makes cross-referencing with secular history impossible when it comes to the Book of Mormon, unlike the Bible, which actually anchors many of its events to known rulers and timelines, right? So you get to passages like Matthew chapter 2, it's also in Luke chapter 1, where it says, in the days of King Herod, this happened, right? You're linking actual events to the things that you're talking about. You don't see that in the Book of Mormon. You're not going to have that. The Bible's history is real and it is accurate. Archaeologists use the Bible more than any other book to make sense of their findings. Do you realize that? When they're doing digs over in the Middle East, they're using the Bible to understand where things would be found and what they should be finding in those places because it's accurate history. And so note this, not only is the Bible by far the strongest when it comes to history, but here's the cool thing. It shows God's plan unfolding through history. And this is also very unique as it relates to the Bible. It's showing you not just what God wants in one setting where he kind of zaps you and gets you to write a book. He's actually showing you what he's doing through the course of history, and he's working through history. Its written record is the oldest, and its oral tradition reaches all the way back to Adam and Eve. You ever think about that? Right? The written tradition goes back to 1400 BC with Moses. But the oral tradition actually reaches all the way back to creation, to Adam and Eve. Only the Quran makes an effort at giving any overarching historical framework, but it is disjointed and it relies upon the Bible and Jewish sources for its history. And as I said before, and it often gets it wrong. If you had come to our seminar, you would have seen very clearly how that happens. Well, a fourth observation would be related to fulfilled prophecy. And this is the category where the Bible scores the most decisive victory when you're looking at the chart. It really is way far above the other books. Most of these holy books make no attempt at prophecy at all. And I'm picking a lot on the Quran today, but at least they attempt to give a history, to give history a purpose and a timeline. Fans of the Quran claim a few fulfilled prophecies, but they really aren't very strong. Probably the most famous and celebrated prophecy, I can share it with you. Here it is. It's from Surah Rum 30, verses 2-4. The Romans have been defeated in the lowest land, but they, after their defeat, will overcome within 3 to 9 years. That's probably the strongest prophecy in the Quran. They claimed that the fulfillment was in the Byzantine Empire's defeat of the Persians around 614 AD, followed by a victory under Emperor Heraclius, which is 622 to 627 AD. Now, this is the strongest and most specific example. Critics argue that it's pretty vague. It's just saying in a few years this has happened, and it may reflect the common political hopes of the time. It's so tight in time. It's literally like a couple of decades of time that we're talking about. And it is very vague. You'll find a few other, like a handful of other prophecies like that, not even as strong as that in the Quran. And so consider things like number and specificity when you're talking about these prophecies. The Quran contains short-term, vague time frames and non-named outcomes. The Bible has detailed long-term messianic rise and fall of actual empires, birthplace and death of the Messiah, the exile and return of Israel, nailed down to specific times and places. There's no comparison. So for example, the Quran says here in Surah 30, Romans will win in a few years. The Bible in Daniel chapter 9 says the Messiah will come 483 years after the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, which we know exactly from Cyrus, right? We can literally name the dates. And so we can actually predict the exact year that the Messiah would ride into Jerusalem triumphantly. These are very different. We could talk about time span, right? In the Quran, prophecies are all local events within Muhammad's lifetime. We're talking about just a couple of decades of time in which these things took place. The Bible's prophecies span thousands of years, going way back to Abraham right up to the time of Jesus. So for example, you could talk about Isaiah names Cyrus around 150 years before his birth as the one who will rebuild Jerusalem. You see that in Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. These are specific prophecies. Then you see external verifiability is another thing that we could talk about. The Quran has few prophecies verifiable from outside Islamic tradition. The Bible has many prophecies that are historically verified by non-biblical records. So for example, the fall of Babylon is predicted in Isaiah 13. The destruction of Jerusalem is predicted by Jesus in Luke chapter 21. And so you see these very specific events that are predicted in the Bible. Then you could talk about messianic prophecies. The Quran has no specific messianic timeline or prophecies about the death and resurrection details, but the Bible contains over 300 messianic prophecies, many of them fulfilled in the life of Jesus. And you can study all of these. Again, I'm centering out the Quran here, but the other holy books really have little to no prophetic commentary in them. And so take a look here at this sort of summary chart as we compare the Bible and the Quran. Specificity, well, it's very high. It includes dates, names, and places. In the Quran, it's low to moderate at best. The number of prophecies, there's many, especially messianic. There's very few in the Quran. The time span it's over centuries, even millennia. Here, it's within 20 years. External verification is extensive. In the Quran, it's limited. In the messianic prophecy, it's central and it's detailed. In the Quran, it's absent or very general. So you can see there's no comparison between these books when it comes to prophecy. Well, there's a few other categories here we could highlight. The categories of moral and spiritual excellence, transformative power, and universal relevance. Let's be honest, those are all quite subjective, right? Different individuals who are involved in different faiths are going to have different testimony on how well these books have helped them. And so it's a little more subjective and harder to nail down. Under the transformative power category, though, it's quite verifiable when we look at societal impact. And that's where I think you can actually measure which of these books has had the greater, impact. In that category, the Bible wins hands down. Note this, guys. There is a general consensus, even among secular historians, that the Bible led to the valuing of individual freedom, intensified scientific inquiry, improved conditions for women, emancipation of slaves, human rights, and the general prosperity of Christianized nations. Guys, this is just generally accepted history. People know that this is true. You can go to many universities and have history teachers that will explain what the Bible did in terms of these things. And so I would actually give you this challenge. Take a map and look at all of the places where Christianity took root and compare the levels of freedom and prosperity in those places compared to places where Christianity never went. In fact, take a look at this map and you can kind of go, yeah, actually, you can kind of see it just by looking at the map, right? It's an interesting study. And you can see the Bible is transformative in all of the places where it went. It brought the highest levels of freedom and prosperity of anywhere in the world. And you can verify that. Well, we can get to the fifth one here. Fifth observation is the claim to divine origin. Now, you may have noticed that the Tao Te Ching and the Tripitaka don't even make a claim to divine origin. So they score 0 in that category. They don't even make a claim for it. Now, humanists who believe that man embodies the highest good, they may like that. They may be cool with the fact that these are just human writings. Personally, I'm not very cool with that. It doesn't really sit well with me. I just don't have that much faith in humanity's ability to solve the world's problems. Sorry, I'm just not. I have faith in a lot of things, but I don't have much faith when it comes to that. Here's something to note. Religions fall into one of two categories: authoritarian and non-authoritarian, right? Authoritarian faiths are where there's an authority, a God figure who tells us what to do, how to live, how to behave, what his moral laws are. In a non-authoritarian faith, that figure doesn't exist. And so the truth that we're looking for comes from inside of us, right? And so those are the two main categories that you see in world faiths. Non-authoritarian faiths tend to be popular with people who don't like to see God as being in control or telling us how to behave. Or maybe they've looked at the records of those stories of God and they don't like them, or they feel like there's issues with God's character in those writings that they don't appreciate. Many of these books come from non-authoritarian faiths that we're looking at today. So like faiths like Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism, those are non-authoritarian faiths. Now, it's not to say that they can't have any wisdom in them or improve people's lives. They certainly do have wisdom, and they certainly have helped people's lives over the centuries. I've had long conversations with Buddhists, for example, and we land in very similar places in relation to a lot of our morality. And so I would encourage you, do take the time to read some of these books, right, and to understand the perspectives in them. But here's the thing. What you'll see is there are many elements that are just missing. For me personally, there are elements that I really want to see that are not existent in these books, like the idea of God working through history to make history make sense, right? And a lot of these faiths, they just kind of recycle through things like reincarnation. There's no real end point of where things are headed. It's a very different situation. For me, if I'm going to give a holy book full points, I want evidence that it really came from God. I want there to be a divine being in the picture that gave us what we're dealing with. Because like I said, I just don't have a lot of faith in humans. I know myself as a human. I know what naturally comes from my heart, right? And I'm looking for something more than that. The band is going to come down. We're going to wrap it up here in just a second. But I know that we're just scratching the surface today. I hope that you will give this study some deeper time and attention. But let me wrap it up with just a few thoughts. I obviously believe that the Bible is superior, and I don't hide that bias. No other holy book combines such a breadth of authorship, historical anchoring, theological coherence, and transformational influence over time as the Bible. You can look at and study this out. You will see that this is true. But there's one other aspect in which the Bible, I think, really differentiates itself. You see, as you're studying these books, you will see that every other holy book that we touched on today contains instruction on how mankind can attain God's favor or reach divinity. That's what you're going to see in each of these. What we can accomplish through our own efforts to attain God or divinity. But the Bible's message is completely the opposite. right? It is that divinity reached down to us. God reached down to us. Only the Bible tells the story of how God reached down to us. And it is very unique in this sense. It's not a message of human effort, but of divine love, right? The hero in all of these Bible stories is God, is Jesus. You ever notice that in the Bible? Even some people that used to claim that, like these stories, they're legends that are being embellished. No, actually, if you read even like the Old Testament or the New Testament, you see that the characters are actually very honestly portrayed, very flawed. The hero through all of the stories is God. The hero is Jesus in all of these. The Bible is the story of God working through history to redeem a fallen planet and sinful human beings. And it connects history and science and faith and everything together as you look at it as a whole. It shows God's intervention into the human experience through the person of Jesus Christ, who is the defining person and the defining moment of history. He is the one who makes sense of everything. So I encourage you guys, I challenge you, read it, right? See God working through history. See how it addresses life's biggest questions that you have. See how Jesus really is the one who makes sense of everything in our world. Join us next week. We're going to wrap it up. Last week, challenging authority. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word, and we thank you that we can have confidence in it. We thank you that it more than stacks up against other books that claim to come from you. Lord, I pray that you would help us not to let this be just an intellectual exercise, but that we would put into practice the words that it contains, and that we would see for ourselves, experientially, the truth that is here in our hands. Lord, I pray for anyone that hasn't taken the time to understand the hero of the Bible, this one named Jesus Christ, that they would take the time to read this story, to understand this historical figure and what he came to do, and how it fits with the bigger picture of what the Bible describes in world history, of what God is doing in the world over time. Lord, thank you again for this time today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Join us every Sunday at 10 a.m. at Cineplex Cinemas in Milton, or visit us online at renewchurch.ca/connect.